America before America, the pre-colonial story. Step into a world long before the United States emerged as a nation, a time when the land stretched vast and untamed, shaped by thousands of years of human ingenuity and resilience. This is the story of the pre-colonial period of North America, a history too often overlooked, yet vital to understanding the true foundations of this land. Join us as we explore how indigenous civilizations laid the groundwork for the rich, complex world we know today. To understand the pre-colonial history of North America, we must first envision the continent itself. Lush forests in the northeast, arid deserts in the southwest, rolling plains and rugged coastlines. This land, with its immense natural resources, provided not only sustenance but also inspiration to the societies that arose here. Indigenous peoples didn't just adapt to their environment, they cultivated it, creating a harmonious relationship that would sustain them for millennia. These societies weren't isolated. North America's natural geography lent itself to diverse cultural developments, creating unique communities with distinct languages, practices, and beliefs, all rooted in a profound respect for the land. The origins of the first Americans stretch back tens of thousands of years. Archaeological evidence suggests early human migration to this continent likely took place via the Bering Land Bridge, a landmass connecting Siberia and Alaska during the last ice age. Others speculate that seafaring might have played a role, with explorers navigating the Pacific Ocean to reach the Americas. As these ancient groups spread across the land, they brought with them knowledge, tools, and traditions passed down through generations. Over time, they established complex societies, each shaped by the unique environments into which they ventured. By 10,000 BCE, indigenous cultures flourished across North America. They built communities designed not just to survive, but to thrive in their surroundings. These societies ranged from small nomadic bands to large, urbanized centers, and their way of life reflected intricate understandings of their environment. In the Mississippi Valley, the mound-building Mississippians created monumental structures like Cahokia. Meanwhile, the ancestral Puebloans of the Southwest constructed cliff dwellings, integrating their homes into the very fabric of the land. On the Pacific Northwest coastal edges, communities leveraged the ocean's bounty, developing sustainable fishing techniques and creating vibrant art, including intricate totem poles. Every region told a story of adaptation, innovation, and survival. One of the most impressive examples of a pre-colonial civilization is Cahokia, located near present-day St. Louis. At its peak, Cahokia was home to tens of thousands of people, making it one of the largest urban centers in the world during its time. The Mississippians built vast earthen mounds for ceremonial and communal purposes, some of which remain standing to this day. Their complex societal structure, trade networks, and agricultural systems reveal a highly sophisticated civilization. In the Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans used advanced engineering to create multi-story cliff dwellings, such as those seen in Mesa Verde. They also pioneered irrigation techniques, channeling scarce water resources to grow crops like corn in an arid environment. This ingenuity became a hallmark of indigenous civilizations throughout the continent. On the Pacific coast, indigenous peoples of the Northwest celebrated their connection to the ocean. They built large, cedar longhouses adorned with intricate carvings, and their potlatch ceremonies reinforced community bonds and hierarchy. The abundance of resources allowed them to establish stable, prosperous societies. Further inland, the Iroquois Confederacy in the northeastern woodlands developed a system of democratic governance that would inspire later political thinkers. Their influence reached not only across other tribes, but also forward in time, shaping the philosophies that underpin the U.S. Constitution centuries later. Though separated by geography, the many cultures of indigenous America were united by shared values of ingenuity and sustainability. One of the most revolutionary contributions of these societies was agriculture. The three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, became staple crops, cultivated in a symbiotic relationship that sustained both the land and the people. These innovations didn't just feed growing populations, they also spread throughout the Americas, influencing global agriculture. Trade networks crisscrossed the continent, connecting distant communities. Goods such as copper from the Great Lakes, turquoise from the Southwest, and shells from the Pacific were exchanged, fostering cultural exchange and technological innovation. Art and storytelling played significant roles in these civilizations. Pottery, textiles, paintings, and ceremonial artifacts embodied cultural identity and passed down traditions. Oral storytelling preserved histories, legends, and knowledge, ensuring that wisdom endured across generations. Indigenous societies were often communal, with strong social structures and defined roles for men, women, and elders. Many tribes, such as those in the northeastern woodlands, operated on matriarchal systems where women played central roles in governance and decision-making. The Iroquois Confederacy offers a prime example of indigenous governance. Built on principles of cooperation and unity, their system allowed for collective decision-making among different tribes. This model of governance, prioritizing consensus and shared responsibility, remains a testament to the sophistication of their political systems. Spiritual life permeated every aspect of indigenous cultures. Beliefs were deeply rooted in a connection to nature, with ceremonies honoring the earth, ancestors, and spiritual forces. Rituals like the sun dance celebrated cosmic harmony, while healing practices drew upon an intimate knowledge of medicinal plants and spiritual well-being. Before colonization, contact with European explorers was minimal, but not non-existent. Vikings from Scandinavia sailed to North America as early as the 10th century, but established no lasting presence. By the 15th and 16th centuries, European ships began arriving along the Atlantic shores. These encounters ranged from peaceful exchanges to moments of conflict. Indigenous tribes were initially curious about European tools and goods, adapting metal instruments and introducing horses into their societies. However, the arrival of Europeans also brought devastating consequences. New diseases like smallpox swept through indigenous populations, wiping out entire communities and leaving irreversible scars. Despite the enormous upheavals introduced by European explorers and settlers, indigenous leaders and communities adapted and resisted. Diplomatic strategies, alliances, and even armed resistance were used in efforts to preserve their cultural identity and autonomy. Yet, even as systems of colonization sought to erase indigenous cultures, they endured. Oral traditions, ceremonies, and knowledge carried forward their legacies, ensuring that these societies' spirit remained alive. The contributions of indigenous civilizations extend far beyond the history books. Agricultural practices, such as the cultivation of corn and the methods of sustainable resource management, continue to influence us today. The Iroquois Confederacy's model of democracy serves as a foundation for understanding collective governance. Their emphasis on communal responsibility and harmony with nature remains profoundly relevant in our modern age. Unfortunately, misconceptions and stereotypes cloud the true story of pre-colonial America. Indigenous societies were often painted as primitive or uncivilized, undermining the complexity, innovation, and humanity of these cultures. Correcting this narrative is essential, not just for historical accuracy, but for honoring the people who came before us. To truly understand pre-colonial America, we must listen to the stories of indigenous peoples themselves. Oral histories and cultural perspectives offer invaluable insights into their lived experiences, far richer than those told solely from the colonizer's view. Avoiding romanticized or oversimplified portrayals of indigenous cultures is key to fostering respect and awareness. This is a history that should be studied not with mourning for what was lost, but with reverence for what has endured and what we can still learn from it. The pre-colonial history of North America is not just the past, it is a foundation for the present. It reminds us of a time when humans lived in balance with the earth, creating societies that innovated and thrived. This history is also an invitation to reconnect with the land, with our shared humanity, and with the enduring wisdom of those who came before. As stewards of this history, it's our responsibility to ensure it is passed on to future generations, not as a forgotten footnote, but as a central chapter in the story of America. The pre-colonial history of North America is a testament to human resilience, creativity, and connection to the natural world. It's a story not just of survival, but of thriving, of communities that embraced ingenuity and sustainability. This is the legacy of the first peoples of this land. By remembering their contributions and honoring their stories, we ensure that their histories remain a vibrant part of America's ongoing narrative. This is not just a tale of the past, it is a reminder of what we can aspire to in the future, a world rooted in respect, balance, and deeper understanding. Exploring the colonial foundations of America. The colonial period of what would become the United States of America is a critical chapter in history. It tells the story of exploration, settlement, cultural exchange, and conflict, all of which shaped the foundations of an independent nation. In this journey, we'll explore these pivotal moments in chronological order, from the European discovery of the New World to the establishment of colonies and interactions with Native Americans. Along the way, we'll see how these events influenced the trajectory of history and laid the groundwork for modern America. At the heart of the colonial period lies the daring age of exploration. In the late 15th and early 16th centuries, European nations embarked on perilous voyages to expand their influence beyond the known world. The motivations for such explorations were clear: the hope of finding precious spices, wealth, and new trade routes to Asia. Christopher Columbus, under the flag of Spain, famously sailed westward in 1492 and stumbled upon lands unknown to Europeans, marking what is widely regarded as the discovery of the New World. Columbus's expeditions revealed vast opportunities, sparking excitement throughout Europe. Soon after, John Cabot, sailing for England in 1497, explored North America's coastline, securing English stakes in this new frontier. These triumphant voyages laid the foundation for what would become a competition among European powers. Countries like Spain, Portugal, England, France, and the Netherlands raced to claim territories and establish colonies in the Americas. But the exploration was not just a one-sided endeavor. It gave rise to the Columbian Exchange, a transformative period of cultural and biological exchange. Foods like maize and potatoes traveled to Europe, while cattle and wheat made their way to the Americas. However, it also brought diseases that devastated Native American populations, forever changing the demographic landscape of the continent. As the promise of wealth and new opportunities grew, so did the desire to claim land and establish lasting settlements. The early 17th century witnessed the formation of the first European colonies in what would later become the United States. The settlement of Jamestown in 1607 marked the beginning of permanent English presence in America. Located in present-day Virginia, Jamestown saw its fair share of tribulations, including harsh winters, limited resources, and conflict with local Powhatan tribes. But despite these challenges, the colonists persevered, particularly with the cultivation of tobacco as a cash crop, which became the backbone of the settlement's economy. Meanwhile, in 1620, a group of pilgrims seeking religious freedom ventured across the Atlantic aboard the Mayflower, landing in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Their establishment of the Plymouth colony not only preserved their faith, but also introduced one of the earliest forms of self-governance through the Mayflower Compact. Other colonies, such as the Massachusetts Bay Colony and New Amsterdam, soon followed, bringing diverse motivations for settlement, from economic gain to religious freedom. Economic ambitions were a major driving force. Colonists sought to exploit the land's natural resources, including tobacco, fur, and later, cotton. Labor demands led to the widespread practice of indentured servitude and eventually the arrival of African slavery. Both would have lasting consequences on the emerging colonial society. Integral to the colonial period were the interactions between European settlers and Native Americans. These relationships were complex, marked by both moments of cooperation and prolonged periods of tension and conflict. Upon arriving in the New World, many European colonists depended on the assistance of Native Americans to survive. Tribes like the Powhatans and Wampanoag played key roles in teaching settlers essential skills, such as growing maize and adapting to the local environment. For example, the first Thanksgiving in Plymouth in 1621 symbolized an initial alliance between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag people, cementing a brief chapter of collaboration. However, The story of European-Indian relations was largely one of rising tensions. As settlers pushed further inland, they encroached upon native territories, triggering disputes over land and resources. Such friction often escalated into violent conflicts. The Powhatan Wars in Virginia and the Pequot War in New England are grim reminders of these struggles, revealing the fragility of coexistence. One of the most devastating conflicts, King Philip's War, erupted in 1675, decimating populations on both sides and resulting in the near-complete displacement of some indigenous groups. Cultural misunderstandings further deepened the divide. While Native Americans had communal approaches to land use, Europeans viewed ownership as an individual right, fueling mistrust. Over time, settlers' dominance grew, and Native communities were subjected to displacement, disease, and the erasure of their traditions. As colonies expanded, a distinctly American society began to emerge, shaped by diverse influences ranging from European traditions to indigenous knowledge. The Atlantic Ocean, once a barrier, became a bridge connecting colonies to international trade networks and cementing their place in the global economy. Social divisions became more evident as the colonies grew. Landowners and merchants represented the wealthy elite, while many laborers, indentured servants, and enslaved Africans struggled to gain independence or rights. Slavery became entrenched as plantations expanded, particularly in the southern colonies, where African labor was critical for cultivating crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo. Religion played a crucial role, with colonies like Massachusetts Bay fostering certain freedoms while enforcing strict moral codes. Religious diversity flourished in states such as Pennsylvania, established by Quakers, and Maryland, which sought to protect Catholics. As these communities developed, so did systems of governance, with town meetings and assemblies becoming the seeds of democracy. The Virginia House of Burgesses, established in 1619, introduced one of the earliest forms of representative government. Population growth and economic pressures spurred settlers to expand westward, resulting in further clashes with native populations. As settlements multiplied, so did tensions between colonists and European monarchies that sought to maintain control over these distant territories. The colonial period was not merely a chapter in American history, it was the foundation of the nation itself. European explorers' search for trade and wealth created opportunities for settlement and exchange, both peaceful and violent. Colonists' determination to establish thriving communities spurred innovation, independence, and resilience, despite the enormous challenges they faced. Equally significant were the Native Americans who shaped colonial history, both as allies and opponents to European settlers. Their contributions, sacrifices, and struggles remained deeply intertwined with the country's origins, even as many of their communities were displaced. The seeds sown during this period deeply influenced the principles and practices of the coming revolution. Colonial self-governance systems, religious diversity, and economic ambition became cornerstones of the American identity. However, the darker legacies of slavery, displacement, and cultural erasure serve as complex reminders of the era's impact on humanity. The colonial period invites us to reflect not only on the beginnings of a new society, but also on the profound and often painful intersections of people, cultures, and ideas. As we examine these histories, we glean lessons about resilience, cooperation, conflict, and the enduring quest for freedom. It is a past that still shapes our present and challenges us to seek a better future. The birth of freedom, the Revolutionary War story. Imagine a land full of untamed opportunity, but bound in chains of tyranny. Colonial America, under the rule of the British Crown, was a place brimming with ambition, yet burdened by oppression. It was here, on this soil, that the seeds of liberty were planted, watered by the vision of a free people. The Revolutionary War was not just a battle fought with muskets and cannons. It was an idea, born in defiance and determined to prevail. Today, we journey into the heart of that revolution, retracing the struggle for freedom. This is the story of the heroes who dared to challenge an empire, the defining moments that shaped a nation, and the unyielding belief in liberty that gave birth to the United States of America. The revolution did not rise overnight. For years, tensions simmered as the British government tightened its grip on the 13 colonies. Following the costly French and Indian War, Britain imposed heavy taxes on the colonies to refill its coffers. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and other measures sparked outrage. No taxation without representation. This powerful rallying cry swept through the colonies, uniting them against what they saw as injustices inflicted by a distant king. The Boston Massacre further fueled resentment, staining the snow with the blood of martyrs. Then came the Boston Tea Party. In an act of defiance, patriots dumped British tea into Boston Harbor, sending a message that resonated across the Atlantic. The colonies would no longer bow to unjust rule. The stage was set. The fight for freedom was no longer a distant notion. It was now an inevitable reality. April 19, 1775. The sun rose over the quiet countryside of Lexington and Concord, but what began as an ordinary day would end as one written into history forever. British troops marched to seize colonial supplies, but the Minutemen stood their ground. The shot heard round the world signaled the start of the Revolutionary War. From there, the conflict escalated. At the Battle of Bunker Hill, patriots held their own against a better-equipped British force, proving that courage and determination could challenge even the mightiest foes. As battles raged, the need for a unified resistance grew. Soon, George Washington was appointed commander of the Continental Army. With him at the helm, the Revolution gained a leader as remarkable in his vision as in his resolve. The war unfolded through many trials and turning points. At first, the Continental Army struggled against the superior forces of Britain. The defeat in New York marked a harsh chapter, but it only strengthened the resolve of the patriots. On Christmas night in 1776, Washington led his troops across the icy Delaware River and launched a surprise attack at Trenton. It was a bold move, and it paid off, a crucial victory that boosted morale when spirits were low. The turning point came at Saratoga. In October 1777, American forces defeated the British in a battle so significant it convinced France to join the fight. The Franco-American alliance shifted the tides of war, proving that the patriots were not alone in their quest for freedom. But not all victories came on the battlefield. The winter at Valley Forge tested the mettle of the Continental Army. In biting cold and harrowing conditions, soldiers endured starvation and disease. Yet they emerged stronger, bound by unwavering loyalty to the cause of independence. Though history often remembers the names of leaders, the Revolution was a collective triumph. At its forefront was General George Washington. His strategic brilliance and steadfast character made him the heart of the war effort. Not far behind was Thomas Jefferson. With eloquence and insight, Jefferson penned the Declaration of Independence, giving words to the hopes and dreams of millions. Others played their part as well. Benjamin Franklin's diplomacy secured crucial alliances. John Adams championed independence with fiery determination. Abigail Adams symbolized strength on the home front. The Marquis de Lafayette, a French ally, fought alongside Americans with courage and conviction. These towering figures remind us that freedom is born from united effort. July 4, 1776. With every stroke of the pen on the Declaration of Independence, the colonists proclaimed a new truth, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This document was more than a declaration. It was a manifesto for liberty and a moral foundation for the fledgling nation. It united the colonies in a shared purpose and gave their struggle a greater meaning. The words of the Declaration resonated not only in America, but across the world, inspiring oppressed people everywhere to dream of freedom and governance by the people. It was a bold act of defiance against tyranny and a beacon of hope for countless generations. The final chapter of the war saw intense battles in the southern colonies. These campaigns, though grueling, cemented the path to victory. The Siege of Yorktown was the climax. In October 1781, American and French forces surrounded British General Cornwallis. After weeks of relentless bombardment, Cornwallis surrendered. The sight of British troops laying down their arms marked the end of major conflict. 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris formally ended the war. Britain recognized the independence of the United States, and the world saw the rise of a new nation, a nation forged in the crucible of revolution. The Revolutionary War did more than achieve American independence. It laid the foundation for a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It enshrined the ideals of liberty and equality as pillars of democracy. The sacrifices of the revolutionaries remind us that freedom is never free. It requires courage, unity, and an unrelenting belief in justice. These men and women, ordinary yet extraordinary, gave their all so that the United States could be born. Their legacy endures not only through monuments and documents, but in the enduring spirit of the American people. The struggle of the Revolution inspires us to cherish liberty, uphold equality, and strive toward a better future. The Revolutionary War was not just a moment in history, it was the birth of an ideal. As we reflect on the sacrifices of those who risked everything for the promise of freedom, we learn a profound truth. The American spirit is one of resilience, courage, and hope. Let us remember their triumphs and honor their legacy. Let us guard the liberty they fought to achieve, and let us continue building this great nation, united under the banner of freedom and justice. This is our history, our inspiration, and our responsibility. For the story of the Revolution is no mere past event. It lives on in every act of courage, every pursuit of equality, and every voice raised in the defense of liberty. The fight for freedom forged the United States of America, a beacon for the world and a testament to the power of unity and belief. The formation of the U.S. government, a nation is born. The formation of the United States government is one of the most pivotal stories in history, an extraordinary journey where a young, struggling nation crafted a system of governance that would endure centuries. From revolution to constitution, this story is filled with visionary ideas, fierce debates, and critical compromises that shaped a democratic republic. This documentary takes you through the key milestones of America's founding, exploring how the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and early leadership set the stage for the government we know today. In 1783, the American colonies triumphed over Britain in the Revolutionary War, gaining their independence and creating high hopes for a prosperous future. But victory brought its own challenges. 13 newly independent states now faced the daunting task of governing themselves. They had broken free of monarchy, but what kind of system could unite them under shared principles? The Articles of Confederation, adopted in 1777 during the war, served as the first framework of national government. However, the document prioritized state sovereignty over federal authority, leaving the central government weak. Congress had no power to tax, regulate trade, or enforce laws, which led to growing unrest. Many states operated as independent entities, often clashing over policies. A major turning point came in 1786 with Shays's Rebellion, an armed uprising of farmers in Massachusetts who were dissatisfied with economic policies and crushing debt. The rebellion, though quickly subdued, highlighted the fragility of the young nation under the Articles of Confederation. It became clear a stronger, more effective government was desperately needed. In May 1787, delegates from across the states gathered in Philadelphia with the original intention of revising the Articles of Confederation. Instead, they decided to scrap the Articles altogether and create a new governing framework, one that could balance order and liberty while uniting the states. This assembly, known as the Constitutional Convention, featured some of the sharpest minds of the era, including James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and George Washington, who presided over the proceedings. The debates were intense, primarily around three key questions. How should states be represented in the National Congress? 2. Federalism. How much authority should the federal government have compared to state governments? Slavery. How would enslaved populations factor into representation and taxation? The delegates ultimately crafted a monumental compromise, the U.S. Constitution. In the Great Compromise, they resolved the issue of representation by creating a bicameral legislature, Congress, composed of the Senate, equal representation for each state, and the House of Representatives, representation based on population. Compromises on slavery, including the Three-Fifths Compromise, allowed enslaved individuals to be partially counted for representation and taxation, though tensions over the issue would persist for decades. The Constitution itself introduced groundbreaking principles. It divided power into three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial, under a system of checks and balances. It also established federalism, dividing authority between the national and state governments. When the final draft was completed in September 1787, not all was resolved. Ratification required approval from 9 of the 13 states, which sparked fierce disagreement between Federalists, who supported the Constitution, and Anti-Federalists, who feared it gave the central government too much power. As the Constitution faced ratification, debates erupted in public forums, newspapers, and state legislatures. The Anti-Federalists voiced sharp concerns about the potential for tyranny under a strong federal government. They argued that the Constitution lacked explicit protections for individual freedoms, something they deemed completely unacceptable. In response, Federalists launched a persuasive campaign. The most notable effort was the Federalist Papers, a series of essays written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. These essays defended the Constitution, emphasizing its ability to prevent abuses of power while creating a strong and united government. To ease tensions, the Federalists promised to add a Bill of Rights after ratification. These amendments, they assured, would safeguard individual liberties. This compromise worked, and the Constitution was ratified by 9 states in 1788, officially becoming the supreme law of the land. The first Congress wasted little time fulfilling its promise. By 1791, the Bill of Rights had been adopted, enshrining protections such as freedom of speech, religion, and the press, as well as the rights to a fair trial and protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. These 10 amendments addressed anti-federalist concerns and solidified the Constitution's acceptance across the nation. With the Constitution firmly in place, attention turned toward the practical task of governing. Who would lead this new government? What would the presidency look like? America's early presidents faced the monumental task of turning an idealistic constitution into a functioning reality. In 1789, George Washington was unanimously elected the first president of the United States. Washington's leadership set critical precedents for the office, many of which endure today. He established an executive cabinet to provide diverse input on national issues, a tradition that continues to shape presidential decision-making. Washington also set the tone for U.S. foreign policy. Facing pressure to join various international conflicts, he made neutrality a guiding principle, keeping the fledgling nation out of foreign entanglements. His farewell address famously warned against political parties and long-term alliances, advice that resonates even today in discussions of U.S. foreign policy. John Adams, America's second president, inherited a country deeply divided by political factions. His presidency was marked by struggles over states' rights and tensions with France, which at one point led to an undeclared naval war. The Alien and Sedition Acts, passed during Adams' term, sparked fierce criticism by restricting freedom of speech and targeting his political opponents. By 1801, Thomas Jefferson assumed the presidency, navigating the complexities of transitioning power between political parties, a peaceful transfer that became a hallmark of American democracy. Jefferson's presidency was defined by the Louisiana Purchase, a massive land acquisition that doubled the country's size and demonstrated the federal government's decisive role in shaping the nation's future. The first years of the U.S. government set critical precedents, from the powers of the presidency to the balance of federal and state authority. They also revealed how compromises, though imperfect, could bridge divides and enable progress. The Constitution and Bill of Rights provided a lasting framework that merged practicality with enduring ideals. Concepts like checks and balances, individual freedoms, and federalism allowed the American government to remain adaptable and resilient in the face of change. Yet the nation's early years also revealed lingering tensions, especially around issues like slavery and states' rights. These would grow into larger conflicts that would test the limits of the Constitution and the unity of the Republic. The formation of the U.S. government was not a single event, but a series of debates, compromises, and groundbreaking ideas woven together to create a resilient system of governance. It was, and continues to be, a work in progress, adapting to the needs of the people while holding fast to the ideals of liberty and democracy. As we reflect on the efforts of these early leaders, one thing stands out: their ability to compromise and focus on shared goals. Their vision created a system that, despite its flaws, has endured for centuries. The story of America's founding is not just a chapter in history. It's a reminder of what can be achieved through cooperation, debate, and perseverance. It is a legacy that challenges every generation to engage in the ongoing experiment of self-governance and to ensure that the principles of freedom and democracy continue to thrive. Today, nearly 2.5 centuries later, the system they created still stands, a testament to the enduring strength of their vision. The westward expansion of the United States, a defining chapter in American history. The push westward may be one of the most ambitious movements in American history. Driven by dreams of opportunity and expansion, the westward expansion of the United States transformed the land, its people, and its future. Through concepts like manifest destiny, significant events like the Louisiana Purchase, and the irreparable impact on Native American communities, this documentary will unravel the complex and multifaceted story of westward expansion. In the early 1800s, as the young United States began forging its path as an independent nation, a new idea began to take hold: manifest destiny. This belief held that Americans had a divine right and duty to expand their territory across the North American continent, from the Atlantic in the east to the Pacific in the west. This ideation wasn't just political, it was cultural, rooted in the growing faith that America was destined for greatness. Proponents of manifest destiny saw westward expansion as the path to secure the nation's future prosperity. They believed that God had ordained the United States to spread its values, democracy, and culture to unsettled lands. Though framed as a noble cause, manifest destiny often justified aggressive policies toward Native American communities and justified the displacement of others in pursuit of this grand vision. Imagery of the time, such as the iconic painting American Progress by John Gast, encapsulated this belief. The figure of Columbia, dressed in white and carrying Enlightenment westward, symbolized progress, while Native Americans and wildlife fled before advancing railroads and settlers on horseback. This vision of manifest destiny captured widespread imaginations, but also reflected the dark shadow that would follow its realization: the human and environmental cost of unchecked ambition. The first massive step toward westward expansion occurred during Thomas Jefferson's presidency in 1803, the Louisiana Purchase. At the time, the United States was a modest-sized country situated along the eastern seaboard. Yet the Louisiana Territory, a vast expanse stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, lay in the hands of French control under Napoleon Bonaparte. This presented both an opportunity and a challenge. Jefferson, understanding the benefits of expanding the nation's lands, capitalized on France's need to fund its wars in Europe. For the then unimaginable sum of $15 million, the United States acquired over 828,000 square miles of land, effectively doubling the country's size overnight. This purchase not only secured vital trade routes like the Mississippi River and New Orleans, but secured a foundation for future westward growth. To learn more about this uncharted wilderness, Jefferson sent explorers Meriwether Lewis and William Clark on a daring expedition. With the guidance of Native Americans like Sacagawea, the Lewis and Clark expedition mapped rivers, cataloged wildlife, and established vital connections with indigenous tribes. Their journey was the first step in understanding the vast potential and challenges of the American West. While heralded as one of the greatest land deals in history, the Louisiana Purchase also sparked debate. It laid bare the inevitable question: how would the federal government handle the land's indigenous inhabitants who already called it home? The answers to that question would soon lead to conflict and tragedy. With new lands opened through efforts like the Louisiana Purchase, western expansion accelerated. Settlers, often small families, farmers, and pioneering men and women, saw the West as a land of opportunity. They pursued a vision of economic prosperity fueled by the promise of fertile farmlands, abundant natural resources, and the chance to start anew. Transportation played an essential role in this migration. Trails like the Oregon and Santa Fe trails became lifelines connecting east to west. The construction of railroads, most notably starting with the Transcontinental Railroad in the 1860s, further enabled settlers to move quickly and efficiently. As these pioneers moved west, towns sprang to life while agriculture, mining, and trade flourished in regions that were once untouched wilderness. Yet, the settlers didn't simply inherit uninhabited lands. They changed them. Forests were cleared to make way for towns and farms, creating irreversible environmental changes. Wildlife populations dwindled, particularly iconic creatures like the bison, which were hunted nearly to extinction. While families dreamed of personal prosperity, the federal government saw westward migration as an opportunity to consolidate American control over its territories. Land policies like the Homestead Act of 1862 incentivized settlers by offering free land to anyone willing to farm it. These policies cemented westward settlement as a cornerstone of national policy, and as settlers expanded, so too did the boundaries of the United States. Amid the progress and promise of westward expansion lay one of its most devastating consequences: the displacement and suffering of Native American communities. For centuries, indigenous tribes had lived on, cultivated, and spiritually connected with much of the land settlers now claimed as their own. As westward expansion gained momentum, these tribes found themselves increasingly marginalized and forced into impossible circumstances. Treaties signed with Native American tribes were frequently manipulated or outright broken by the U.S. government, leading to forced removal from ancestral lands. One of the most infamous examples of this was the Trail of Tears, wherein thousands of Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, and other Native Americans were forcibly relocated across the country to designated Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma. The journey was fraught with suffering. Starvation, disease, and death claimed thousands of lives. Policies like the Indian Removal Act of 1830 epitomized the federal government's stance, prioritizing expansion over the rights of indigenous peoples. That displacement extended beyond physical relocation. Tribes faced cultural erasure through forced assimilation programs, including the establishment of Indian boarding schools, which aimed to strip Native children of their heritage and replace it with Anglo-American customs. Despite the overwhelming injustices faced by Native Americans, many resisted with courage. Leaders like Tecumseh rallied their people in defense of their lands, while others negotiated tirelessly to preserve remnants of their cultures and territories. Their struggles, though hard-fought, underscore the tragic undercurrent of westward expansion. Progress for one group often came at unbearable costs for another. The westward expansion wasn't without its conflicts. As settlers pushed further into contested territories, violence often erupted between indigenous peoples, settlers, and the federal government. The Indian Wars, spanning much of the 19th century, were a series of battles and confrontations over land claims and sovereignty. Beyond indigenous conflicts, the addition of new territories created tensions among Americans themselves. As new territories were incorporated, fierce debates arose over whether these regions would allow slavery. This divisive issue sowed seeds of discord between northern and southern states, tensions that eventually grew into the Civil War. Economically, westward expansion spurred development. Vast gold and silver discoveries, such as those in California in 1849, brought wealth and development to the West. However, these ventures also inspired speculative enterprises that sometimes ended in financial ruin for settlers who staked everything on an uncertain future. Westward expansion demonstrated the lengths to which the United States would push itself, physically, politically, and ethically, to realize its ambitions. Yet a reckoning loomed as Americans began to grapple with the consequences of their relentless growth. The westward expansion was undoubtedly one of the most transformative eras in American history. It redefined the nation's boundaries, shaping the political and economic landscape of the United States forever. From an expanding railroad system to the formation of many states west of the Mississippi, the movement westward represented the culmination of a nation's ambition and resilience. However, this era also came at an undeniable cost. Native American cultures suffered near total devastation as tribes were displaced and marginalized. Moreover, the spirit of manifest destiny, while initially inspiring, left a complicated legacy of exclusion and inequality. Even today, the echoes of westward expansion remain. Issues surrounding indigenous land rights, the preservation of cultural heritage, and the continued debate over the moral lessons of expansion linger. How Americans view this history, celebrating its milestones while acknowledging its tragedies, plays a central role in understanding the nation's identity. The westward expansion of the United States was an era marked by ambition, innovation, sacrifice, and conflict. It was a time when a young nation spread its wings, seizing opportunities that promised a brighter future. Yet it was also a time of profound consequences for the land, for Native Americans, and for the collective conscience of the nation. As we reflect on this transformative chapter in history, it's essential to balance the breakthroughs and benefits of westward expansion with the recognition of its human and environmental costs. By understanding both the light and shadow of this era, we can better appreciate how the choices of the past continue to shape the nation's story to this day. The Civil War, a defining chapter in American history. Step into the pages of history and witness the story of how division gave birth to transformation. The American Civil War was more than a clash of armies. It was a battle for the nation's very soul. Through sacrifice, struggle, and visionary leadership, the war left an indelible mark on the United States, shaping us in ways that still resonate today. The roots of the Civil War reached deep into the foundation of the young United States. By the mid-19th century, the nation stood divided by culture, economy, and ideology. In the North, industrial progress fueled cities bustling with trade, commerce, and innovation. In stark contrast, the South's economy depended heavily on agriculture and its backbone, enslaved labor. At the heart of the divide was slavery, a brutal institution that denied millions of their humanity. Southern states sought to defend their way of life, while Northern calls for abolition grew stronger. States' rights became a deeply polarizing issue, with the South arguing that individual states should determine whether to permit slavery instead of following federal mandates. The push westward only deepened the rift, as fierce debates erupted over whether new territories would admit slavery. Legislation such as the Missouri Compromise and the Kansas-Nebraska Act aimed to manage these disputes, but only fanned the flames of dissent. The raid led by John Brown on Harper's Ferry in 1859 signaled that the fight over slavery could no longer avoid violence. The stage was set for a monumental conflict. By 1861, tensions boiled over into open confrontation. On April 12th, Confederate forces fired the first shots of the Civil War at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The battle itself caused no casualties, but its impact was seismic. It shattered hopes of a peaceful resolution, and President Abraham Lincoln called for volunteers to preserve the Union. The South quickly coalesced into the Confederate States of America under Jefferson Davis, determined to defend their independence and way of life. The Union, under Lincoln, committed itself to reunifying the fractured country. The war began with both sides believing victory would come swiftly. Instead, America plunged into a prolonged and devastating conflict that would stretch across 4 years. The Civil War was defined by its battles, clashes that not only tested military strategies but the very resolve of those who fought. Early on, Confederate forces achieved significant victories, buoying Southern morale and leaving the North struggling to regroup. However, decisive Union triumphs would gradually shift the tide. The Battle of Antietam in 1862 marked a grim milestone as the bloodiest single day in American military history. Though neither side could claim a decisive victory, the staggering loss of life underscored the war's brutal toll and dissuaded European powers from recognizing the Confederacy. Shortly after, President Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, transforming the fight into a battle for freedom. In 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg became the turning point of the war. For 3 grueling days, Union and Confederate forces clashed in Pennsylvania. When the smoke cleared, the Union victory not only halted the Southern advance, but also shattered Confederate momentum. Weeks later, the Union captured Vicksburg, gaining control of the Mississippi River and effectively splitting the Confederacy in two. As the war progressed, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman embarked on his infamous March to the Sea, employing a scorched earth strategy that devastated Southern infrastructure. The war was no longer just about battles, it was about breaking the will of the Confederacy to fight. At the center of this storm stood Abraham Lincoln, a figure whose leadership defined the Union's struggle. As president, Lincoln bore the weight of a fractured nation on his shoulders. His unwavering commitment to preserving the Union gave the North a moral and strategic anchor amid the chaos. Lincoln's resolve was perhaps best demonstrated in his landmark address at Gettysburg. In a speech of just over 2 minutes, he honored those who had fallen, reminding the nation that the sacrifices were not in vain. He called for a new birth of freedom and a government of the people, by the people, for the people, vowing that the Union would endure. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 marked a radical shift. Though it technically freed enslaved people only in Confederate-held territories, it redefined the war's purpose. The fight was no longer merely about preserving the Union. It became a moral crusade for liberty and justice. The Civil War's ultimate legacy is the abolition of slavery. The conflict, agonizing as it was, dismantled an institution that had stained the nation since its founding. Enslaved people actively contributed to their liberation. Tens of thousands escaped to Union lines, and by war's end, nearly 200,000 African American soldiers had joined Union forces. Their courage and contribution were not merely symbolic, they were instrumental to the Union's victory. In 1865, with the Union on the brink of victory, Congress passed the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery completely. The Civil War had cost untold lives, but it paved the way for a freer America. Yet the fight for equality was only beginning. The Civil War was not just a story of leaders and battles. It was a story of human endurance amid unimaginable hardship. By the war's end, more than 620,000 Americans, roughly 2% of the population, had perished, a staggering cost that touched virtually every community. Civilians also bore the weight of war. Families faced the constant fear of losing loved ones. Southern towns were devastated, homes burned, and farms destroyed as Union forces marched closer. Women took on unprecedented roles, managing farms, working as nurses, or even disguising themselves as men to fight on the front lines. The war also revolutionized how battles were fought, with new technologies like ironclad ships, railroads for transporting troops, and weapons capable of more lethal tactics. It was a grim preview of modern warfare. By 1865, the Confederacy was crumbling. Union forces under General Ulysses S. Grant steadily pressed southward, while Sherman's army carved a path of destruction through Georgia. Finally, at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant, effectively ending the Civil War. Yet tragedy struck just days later. Abraham Lincoln, the man who had guided the Union through its darkest hours, was assassinated. His death shocked a nation that had only begun to heal. The war's end brought Reconstruction, a contentious and uneven effort to rebuild the South and integrate formerly enslaved people into society as free citizens. Though the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments aimed to guarantee equality, the path was fraught with challenges that persisted for generations. The Civil War was a defining chapter in American history, a story of resilience, sacrifice, and the enduring fight for justice. It was a struggle not just for a nation but for its ideals, liberty, equality, and unity. Today we see the echoes of that conflict in ongoing conversations about race, rights, and national identity. The lessons of the Civil War remind us that progress is hard-won but necessary, and that a government of the people, by the people, for the people, must stand as an unyielding promise for all. As we reflect on the deep scars of the past, we honor the sacrifices made for a more just and equal America. The Civil War was not the end, but a new beginning, a painful yet pivotal step toward the nation we aspire to be. The Industrial Revolution, transforming America. The Industrial Revolution, a turning point in history that forever altered society, industry, and the human experience. Today, we'll explore how this fascinating era unfolded in the United States, from the spark of economic growth to waves of immigration and the rise of bustling cities. Packed with compelling narratives and visuals, this journey will reveal how the Industrial Revolution shaped America into the nation we know today. The story of the Industrial Revolution in the United States begins in the late 18th century, when small communities relied on agriculture and artisanal goods. The introduction of new technologies began shifting this traditional way of life. One of the most impactful innovations was Eli Whitney's cotton gin, which revolutionized the production of cotton in the South. In the North, factory systems began to emerge, especially in towns like Lowell, Massachusetts. These factories replaced the cottage industry, where goods were made at home, with centralized production powered by water and later steam energy. This new system allowed for faster production of textiles, shoes, and other products that were previously crafted by hand. Transportation also underwent a monumental transformation. The development of canals, such as the Erie Canal, and the expansion of railroads connected cities and markets like never before. Railroads, in particular, became the lifeblood of the economy, carrying goods, people, and innovations across vast distances. Steel, coal, and textile industries grew at a staggering pace, creating new wealth and opportunities for trade. But economic growth wasn't just about materials and machinery, it was about ideas too. Entrepreneurs like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller led the way, spearheading industries in steel and oil. Their empires weren't just symbols of success, but also reminders of the rapid inequality that arose during this period. The economic boom of the Industrial Revolution wouldn't have been possible without the influx of immigrants seeking better lives in America. During the 19th century, millions of people left their homelands due to economic hardship, famine, and oppression. They were drawn to the promise of opportunity in the United States, where jobs in factories, railroads, and mines were plentiful. Irish immigrants fleeing the potato famine of the 1840s formed a large part of this wave. Many took on back-breaking work in construction and railroad building. By the late 19th century, Italians, Eastern Europeans, and Chinese migrants arrived, enriching the nation's workforce and culture even further. Yet the immigrant experience was not without hardships. Poor wages, unsafe working conditions, and overcrowded living quarters often greeted newcomers. Many faced discrimination and hostility, particularly from groups that feared losing jobs or traditions to these newcomers. Their contributions went beyond labor. Immigrants brought unique traditions, cuisines, and languages, transforming cities into cultural melting pots. They also laid the groundwork for labor movements by organizing and fighting for better working conditions, a testament to their resilience and determination. As industries thrived, cities grew into booming urban centers. In the early 19th century, most Americans lived in rural areas, but by the century's end, urbanization had taken hold. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Boston became destinations for families seeking jobs, modern amenities, and new opportunities. Factories in these urban areas created dense populations, leading to rapid construction of infrastructure. Skyscrapers, bridges, and public transportation systems began to define the modern cityscape. On one hand, these cities were beacons of progress, offering employment and innovation. On the other hand, they faced severe challenges. Overcrowding led to cramped tenements where many working-class families lived in unsanitary conditions. Public health crises emerged due to poor waste management and limited clean water. Despite these hardships, urban life created opportunities for social mobility. Department stores, theaters, and new leisure activities emerged, offering glimpses of modern consumer culture. Urbanization also facilitated cultural exchange, with immigrant and native-born communities interacting in bustling neighborhoods. By the late 19th century, a new middle and wealthy upper class emerged, further defining class distinctions in urban areas. Industrialists lived in luxury, while working-class families struggled to get by. These cities, as vibrant as they were, showcased the contrasting realities of industrial progress. For all its achievements, the Industrial Revolution had undeniable costs, particularly for the working poor. Factories, mines, and railroads were built on the labor of millions who endured grueling conditions. Workers faced long hours, often exceeding 12-hour shifts for meager pay. Safety standards were minimal, and injuries or illnesses were common. Children were not spared from this harsh reality. Many factory owners employed child laborers who could be paid even less than adults and were small enough to operate machinery in tight spaces. The plight of these young workers eventually sparked outrage, paving the way for child labor laws in the early 20th century. In response to such exploitation, workers began to organize. Labor unions and strikes became powerful tools for demanding fair wages, reasonable hours, and safer working conditions. The rise of movements like the Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor signaled a shift toward collective bargaining and workers' rights. The Industrial Revolution also highlighted the stark divide between rich and poor. While industrialists like Carnegie and Rockefeller built fortunes that left a lasting legacy, their wealth contrasted sharply with the hardships of their employees. This inequality raised important questions about the ethics of industrial capitalism, a topic that still resonates today. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just a story of machines and factories, it also transformed society. Women who had traditionally worked in the home or on farms began to enter the workforce in greater numbers, particularly in textile factories. Though they faced significant discrimination and earned less than men, this shift offered a glimpse of changing gender dynamics and laid a foundation for future women's movements. African Americans also played a role in the industrial story. While the majority worked in agriculture, particularly in the post-slavery South, many migrated northward in search of industrial jobs. This period marked the early stages of what would eventually become the Great Migration, a massive movement of African Americans to northern cities in the early 20th century. Industrialization also spurred debates about social responsibility and economic power. Philanthropy became a way for wealthy industrialists to address these issues. Figures like Andrew Carnegie advocated for the gospel of wealth, which emphasized the moral obligation of the rich to use their fortunes for the greater good, funding libraries, education, and other public institutions. The Industrial Revolution was a time of monumental change, shaping the United States into an industrial powerhouse. It brought incredible advancements in technology, transportation, and manufacturing that continue to define modern life. However, it also came with significant challenges: exploitation, inequality, and social upheaval. Understanding this chapter of history is crucial for reflecting on the balance between progress and ethics. The innovations of the Industrial Revolution remind us of the power of human ingenuity, while its social costs serve as a cautionary tale. It's a story of resilience, ambition, and transformation, one that laid the foundation for the modern world. As we look to the future, the lessons of this remarkable period remain relevant. From the rise of technology to ongoing discussions about workers' rights and economic justice, the echoes of the Industrial Revolution are all around us. By learning from the past, we can shape a more equitable, innovative, and prosperous future for all. U.S. at War, a chronicle of 20th century conflicts. Welcome to a journey through the defining moments of 20th century warfare, where the United States forged its role as a global superpower. Through three major conflicts, World War I, World War II, and the Cold War, this documentary reflects on how war molded America's identity, transformed lives, and redefined global dynamics. Join us as we explore these moments, their causes, sacrifices, and outcomes, in a way that's engaging and thought-provoking for all. The early 20th century marked a world dominated by imperial rivalries, and war seemed inevitable. When World War I began in 1914, the United States chose the path of neutrality. President Woodrow Wilson and the American public believed in staying distant from European conflicts, unconvinced they should play a role in what seemed like a foreign affair. But circumstances shifted by 1917. A turning point came with the sinking of the British ocean liner Lusitania, where American lives were lost due to German submarine warfare. The interception of the Zimmermann telegram, Germany's proposal to ally with Mexico against the U.S., further eroded America's neutrality. Combined with mounting economic ties to Allied powers, these events forced America to enter the war. By 1918, over 2 million American troops had been mobilized, a crucial infusion of manpower. Known as doughboys, these soldiers bolstered the fatigued Allied forces, bringing an end to stalemate trench warfare. In battles like Belleau Wood and the Meuse-Argonne offensive, they fought heroically, solidifying the United States' reputation as a formidable force. Back home, the war instigated massive changes in industry and societal roles. Women entered factory jobs in unprecedented numbers, while propaganda fostered unity but also spurred intolerance toward immigrant communities. The war ended in 1918 with an Allied victory, opening a new chapter in global diplomacy. President Wilson's vision for world peace took form in the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations. Though the U.S. ultimately rejected the League, its role in the war signified America's emergence as a major world player. World War II erupted as fascist regimes in Germany, Italy, and Japan sought to expand their influence. For the United States, though, the 1930s were marked by economic recovery and a focus on domestic issues following the Great Depression. Isolationism remained strong even as the Axis powers continued their aggression. However, America's position started shifting through programs like the Lend-Lease Act, which supplied arms and resources to Allied nations. Then, on December 7, 1941, everything changed. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, catapulting the U.S. into the war. President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared it a date which will live in infamy, and the nation rallied as one to join the global conflict. With its entry, the U.S. became the arsenal of democracy. Factories turned to war production, creating everything from tanks to aircraft. Women joined the workforce en masse, symbolized by the iconic Rosie the Riveter. Meanwhile, African Americans pushed for equality under the banner of the Double V campaign, victory against fascism abroad and racism at home. On the battlefield, U.S. forces played pivotal roles in turning the tide. D-Day in June 1944 marked a bold invasion of Nazi-occupied France, while the Pacific War saw brutal victories at Midway and Iwo Jima. Technological innovation also became critical, with the Manhattan Project culminating in the creation of the atomic bomb. In 1945, the war's dual theaters reached their climaxes. Hitler's regime collapsed as Allied forces stormed into Berlin, ending the European front. The Pacific Front concluded after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, symbolizing both victory and tragedy. Post-war challenges were immense, but the U.S. emerged as a leader. The Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe, while the formation of the United Nations offered hope for future peace. Still, the scars of World War II shaped the global order in profound ways. The world had survived total war, but tensions were far from over. The conclusion of World War II ushered in a new kind of conflict, one defined not by open battle, but by ideological rivalry. The United States and the Soviet Union, once allies against the Axis powers, became adversaries in a tense standoff that lasted over 4 decades. The Cold War was rooted in the clash of ideologies: capitalism, championed by the U.S., versus communism, spearheaded by the Soviet Union. This ideological divide led to proxy wars, economic competition, and a race for technological dominance. It began in 1947 as the Soviet Union sought to expand its influence across Europe and Asia. In response, President Harry Truman introduced the Truman Doctrine, aimed at containing communism. This principle drove U.S. actions during the Cold War. One of its first fiery eruptions was the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. American troops fought alongside South Korea against the communist-backed North, resulting in a grueling and costly conflict that ended in stalemate. A similar strategy unfolded during the Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975, where the effort to stop communism led to vast casualties and domestic protests, leaving the U.S. deeply divided. Though proxy wars were fought on the ground, other arenas defined the Cold War. The arms race introduced the terrifying concept of mutually assured destruction, MAD, with both superpowers stockpiling nuclear weapons. Simultaneously, the space race reached new heights as America's Apollo 11 mission landed humans on the moon in 1969, affirming U.S. scientific and technological dominance. Diplomacy was often tenuous. One of the most iconic moments came with the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, where the world teetered on the brink of nuclear war before the crisis was narrowly diffused. Espionage and intelligence, led by organizations like the CIA, played shadowy but vital roles in this high-stakes conflict. However, the Cold War would eventually reach its natural end. Mounting economic challenges in the Soviet Union, pressures from the NATO alliance, and growing public unrest within communist states led to historic moments like the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. By 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, effectively ending the Cold War without the catastrophic outcomes many had feared. The wars of the 20th century reshaped the United States. In World War I, we witnessed the nation step onto the world stage. During World War II, America emerged as a superpower, while the Cold War tested its resilience and ingenuity through ideological conflicts and proxy battles. These wars remind us of the sacrifice and determination required to protect values and preserve global stability. They also teach us the cost of violence, the importance of diplomacy, and the complex web of global politics that persists today. As we look to the future, lessons from these conflicts remain relevant. We must honor history's painful truths while striving not to repeat its mistakes. Thank you for joining us on this journey to understand the wars that defined America and the world in the 20th century.